Is there more going on with water issues than the average person realizes?
Definitely.
What?
Um,
Everyone started buying toilet paper, and then
yes,
there,
we did.
what the hell? It was everywhere. It was everywhere, and it's like literally the last thing you can survive without. It's not great, but you can definitely survive without toilet paper of all things.
Right.
And all it made me think was, we're bad in a crisis. Don't
Correct.
let us go down to crisis mode because
Yeah.
the whole world kind of just goes insane.
One of the things I like to tell people is in the same way that maybe you thought a little more about food in terms of what pesticides or the way food is grown or who grows your food. There's actually those same kinds of issues and ideas to think about with our water, right? And water is something we all consume every day. There are issues that we need to be aware of and be cautious so that we're protecting our health. I'm not a huge, we use the term prepper here in the States, right? Like, I'm
Yeah.
not, I don't think I'm prepared for, the end of the world by any means, but I think these sort of smart things of, people who live in California that have wildfires tend to have a little go bag, right? They have something in
Yeah.
case a wildfire hits their home very quickly. And I think we want to think about that in terms of water as well. I was very into minimalist blogs for a while, and people talk about
Okay.
zero waste or these kinds of things, and they're like, what we need is more people trying to imperfectly do this than everyone trying to be perfect, and and I think that's such a great message for environmental issues in general.
Welcome to Sustainability for Sinners, a non judgmental, informative, and hopefully helpful place you can learn about sustainability. I focus on health, water, food, energy, antibiotics, detoxifying your life, and much, much more. If you like what you hear, then go ahead and hit the follow button. Enjoy! Suzanne, welcome. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
Would you like to introduce yourself, or would you
Oh
like me to
gosh,
introduce you?
you can do it. That's I'm not
Can
as
I
good at
introduce you with what you're introduced in on the book? So this is Suzanne's book with Erin Brockovich. Superman's Not Coming, Our National Water Crisis and What We the People Can Do About It. It's an amazing book, and this is how I got to know Suzanne. Um, it's one of the most practical books I think I've ever read on water, chemicals, community action coming together, and just the yeah, an eye-opening um, understanding of what's going on that you don't get from the mainstream media. You don't get it from the news, and these are two veterans that have been thrashing around in these areas for a long, long time, and I've gathered just an amazing amount of case studies and really just important information that people can use. And it's all there. And funnily enough, I realized I have two of them.
it. Super
So,
fan. Thank you so much.
yeah, super fan. Like, and I've like notes in every one of them.
Oh,
But yeah, no. So I'm going to introduce you from this. Sorry, I got sidetracked there.
no worries.
Where is it? So Suzanne Boothby is the author of The After Cancer Diet. She is a journalist who writes about health, politics, food, and eco-conscious stories. Yeah, and you're from North Carolina.
Actually, I'm in Richmond, Virginia now, so that's
Oh,
so
very
thank you.
good. Also a
I've
nice
lived in
place.
many places, so I'm much more of a nomad, if anything.
Yeah, a lot of you guys over there are moving around a
We
lot.
like to move around.
But
Yeah,
then you wouldn't have ended up in America if you didn't. Like it's
it's
part of
right.
the gene pool that decided to make the big step while we all
Exactly.
stayed here. So Suzanne, we'll jump right into it. Uh, Water safety and contamination. Is there more going on with water issues than the average person realizes?
Definitely.
What?
Well, I think we have to remember, everybody's on a different journey. And so if you happen to live in a community that's been impacted by water issues, then you probably know a lot more. But depending, and I'm trying to think of more. I'm always thinking about a US audience, but I know that, you're in the UK, and these
Ireland,
issues
Ireland.
are, thank you, sorry, Ireland.
Yeah.
These are global issues for sure. And
Yeah.
so it just depends on what luck of the draw that your community has experienced. So I think there are certain people who are very versed and understand. And I think there's a lot of people who still just take great advantage of the fact that, they can turn on the water in their at their sink and fill it up and have a glass to drink or take a shower or make your morning coffee or oats, whatever you do, and
Mhm.
don't really give it much thought. But I think one of the things I like to tell people is in the same way that maybe you've thought a little more about food in terms of what pesticides or the way food is grown or who grows your food. There's actually those same kinds of issues and ideas to think about with our water, right? And water is something we
Mhm.
all consume every day. Most of us
All the
consume about
time.
a gallon a day in various ways. We also, we use it not only for drinking and hydration, but we use the restroom. We use,
Yeah.
we had a water event here in Richmond, Virginia in January where we had no water coming out of our tap because something happened at the water treatment plant. And you learn very quickly how much water is a part of your life when you don't have access to
Yeah.
it. Now, because of what I do and that I read and research about these things, I have a water emergency plan.
Gee.
So
Uh,
I'm one of the few people that has, like, I keep water in my basement. I get spring water delivered. I have all these different little reserves of water for just this kind
Brilliant.
of thing. And I also
Yeah.
know how to flush my toilet if there's no water running. And right, there's all these little things that people can learn. And, I'm not prepared if all the water systems go down forever, but I have a plan for about 2 weeks of, water
Wow.
issues. And I think everybody should have that because regardless of whether there's a water treatment issue that the water stops or if there's a water contamination issue, like we've seen in places like Flint, East Palestine, Ohio, right? We all know that there's these communities that have experienced big water issues, and you don't normally get a whole lot of timing. No one tells you like, oh, there's going to be a water issue. Here in Richmond, the power went out in the morning, and they didn't tell anybody because they thought they could fix it. And so everyone
Oh,
got home at 5 p.m. from work and turned on their taps, and there was no water. And so what do?
damn.
They immediately go to the store. They go to a gas station. They go to try to find water because they don't have it at home like I do.
Yeah.
The backup. And so, but that's the same thing, that whether you were in Flint, Michigan, and there was a lead contamination, or, when you're in California and there's wildfires, and then there's a issue of, is the water safe to drink, right? There's all these different potential problems that come up for people. And so, I think it's so important to get educated and to learn about the potential issues that could happen to your water system. And also there's, we'll get into it obviously, but there's a lot of chemicals that you can't see that are in your water that aren't necessarily being tested for. And so there's a
Yeah.
lot of reasons, and I'm not, I don't like to be alarmist. And tap water is a beautiful thing that we have in most industrialized countries. And at the same time, there are issues that we need to be aware of and be cautious so that we're protecting our health. Um, you
Yeah.
know, I got introduced to Erin to work on the book because of my background in health and working on cancer and other toxic kind of issues. I didn't come from a scientific background per se. I'm a journalist, I have curiosity, but I had written a lot about health. And when I first met Erin, she said, oh, yeah, well, most water issues are actually, it's a health crisis in a community.
Yeah.
People have cancer, people have stomach issues, the children get sick, the animals get sick. That's usually the first indication that there's a problem.
That's definitely food for thought. Especially about the plan. Like you should share that. Are you
Yes,
sharing that?
there on our again, the Brockovich Report is the newsletter that Erin and I put out every week. And I do have an article in there if you search. And I
Yeah.
should probably just recycle that content all the time because I think,
Oh,
things
con
get lost and people
yeah.
forget.
Yeah,
But I think that's something, I know we'll talk a lot more about solutions along with these
yeah.
problems, but I think people just being aware that, in this country, I can speak to most water treatment plants and water systems are about 100 years old. So that's why we're always having conversations about infrastructure and updating our infrastructure because the pipes, a lot of the building materials used in plants, they're very, very old. And so there's an issue of replacing pipes. There's an issue of um,
Sorry,
do
Suzanne,
people, are you
I
still
lost
there?
you there. Yeah, I
Okay,
sorry, it's my probably dodgy internet connection.
that's okay.
Um, sorry, could you repeat that last part so that
Yeah, so I'm talking about water treatment plants and their age,
yeah.
and that most of them are about 100 years old. And so that water infrastructure, there's so much that can go awry in terms of if there's a big storm event, if there's a chemical leak. We're just not in a great place right now. We're not very as resilient as we could be. And
Hmm.
so that's part of why, one thing you can just do today is go out, get some bottled water, or, we have big jugs that we fill up to keep on reserve so that if there is some kind of water event that you have a way to access water.
That's
Um,
so smart. That is so smart because one of the things I realize is people are terrible in a crisis. Like
yes.
the like I did a bit of research for a chapter on water, and
Mhm.
it was about just the reduction of the we're grabbing into the aquifers now in multiple areas of the world, and there's a constant decline in many places in all the reserves, and all I kept thinking of was the COVID crisis where everyone did. I think it happened uh, around your place as well, where they everyone started buying toilet paper. And then
Yes.
there,
We did.
what the hell? It was everywhere. It was everywhere. And it's like literally the last thing you can survive without, it's not great, but you can definitely survive without toilet paper of all things.
Right.
And all it made me think was, we're bad in a crisis. Don't
Correct.
let us go down to crisis mode because
Yeah.
the whole world kind of just goes insane. And it was
Sure.
about fucking toilet paper.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know what I mean? I'm like, oh God. So yeah.
And I think too, people really need to tailor their plan to what they've got. Like I used to live in New York City. Like I understand what it is to live in a 700 square foot studio apartment, right? There's
Yeah.
space can be very limited.
Yeah.
But it might be that there's a couple bottles of water that you can stick in the back of a closet or under a bed, or maybe there's a
Yeah.
bike storage place where you can have a jug of
Squeeze
water.
it in
All
there.
right, like you just
Feel
have to start to be creative, like talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends. I think if we spend a little more time talking about these issues and maybe a little less time with Kardashians or whatever is your flavor of reality TV. Not to say,
maths married at first sight is mine. But yeah.
I like the White Lotus. I like my shows
Oh,
too, but
okay.
like let's also have some deeper conversations and creativity and help each other out when it comes to these ideas around, because
Yeah.
I'm not a huge we use the term prepper here in the States, right? Like I'm
Yeah.
not I don't think I'm prepared for, the end of the world by any means, but I think these sort of smart things of, people who live in California that have wildfires tend to have a little go bag, right? They have something in
Yeah.
case a wildfire hits their home very quickly. And I think we want to think about that in terms of water as well, that if there's a moment
Mm.
where the water goes down, that, water is not something you can go a week without,
No.
it's really a
Mm.
day, if even that.
Yeah, it's the food you can go a long time without, right? But the water
Correct.
is definitely not the one.
Yeah.
What we had it was kind of sinister, but the EU gave out a recommendation that we pack a 3-day bag as well, lately. And you're like, why? What's wrong? Geopolitical tensions, all these things, and
Sure.
the EU had this lady pack a backpack with food supplies and everything.
Oh,
I don't know if she mentioned water too much, but definitely water should be like top of the list.
very much
Um,
so. Yeah.
yeah. Um, Okay, so the next question would be, do you think water issues are getting better or worse?
It's a really good question. I'm someone who believes in progress, and I do think in some ways people are learning more. I think the science is getting better. There's so many different issues. We could talk about water quality, water scarcity,
Yeah.
contaminants, right? There's a lot of different parts of this conversation. I do believe that there's progress happening. Does that mean that we're all good? No, there's still a lot of problems.
Mm.
We have a lot of issues with our regulatory agencies and how much funding and staffing. And, there's a big conversation in this country right now because of our current administration around regulations. And, should companies be
Mm.
allowed to do their own regulations, or should we not? If are we not having the right progress if companies have to abide by certain regulations? And my feeling on that is that regulations keep people safe, and a lot of the regulations we have are not even really being enforced. And so there's a whole
Hmm.
conversation around, you can write beautiful policy, you can write great regulations, and then you have to decide, are these companies actually following the rules, or are they paying, the fines and
Yeah. Yeah. Are
continuing
they
to,
genuinely scared as well of being
yeah.
caught?
Right,
Yeah,
right.
I,
And so pollution becomes this thing that's just the legal department of a company will deal with that, as
yeah.
opposed to thinking about how can we be a good neighbor? Are we helping our community? Are we building? I'm not against business growth. I'm not against, very much someone who, benefits from all kinds of companies as much as
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't like to, like, it was interesting when I was writing the book and we wrote about fracking because that's one issue where it can be very destructive to the communities that live close by. At the same
Hmm.
time, like, I have a car, I
Yeah.
have a hybrid car, so I try to use less. But these are real issues that countries, that communities have to grapple with in terms of, how do we continue to have progress and have good lives. I don't think we're going back. I don't think we're going back to caves and tribes and that sort of
Yes.
thing.
Yeah.
And honestly, during that time, there was a lot of water problems, right? We didn't have great water treatment systems, and we weren't using a lot of the things that we now really enjoy. Most of the world, of course, there's still people who don't have access to these things, but a lot of the
Mhm.
world does have access to fairly clean water. That doesn't mean that we can't still improve and progress. So it's a very nuanced conversation. It's hard to pinpoint. I mean, we could talk
Yeah.
about some specific ways that we could see that we're getting better. And I
Yeah.
think try to really take in criticism as much as anyone in terms of, like, are we trying to overregulate? Are there ways to simplify these processes? Like, in my mind, companies have the funding, they've got great, smart people working for them. Like, I'd love it if they were the ones that were
Stepping
being
up.
innovative
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
setting the tone.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they have um, their bottom lines and they want to make profit. And so sometimes this is where we get into issues where they're not doing the recommended things
Mm.
to, or they're actually, and, in some cases in this country, you can pollute a certain amount, and that's okay with the EPA because we've set a certain standard of, like, well, you can release this amount from the factory, or you can do
Yeah.
this much with the farm. And we've said that's okay. But then if you go beyond that, then you have a fine to pay, or then, we look into it more.
And the 2 points there. Eleanor D. Roosevelt said that corporations or companies are an inevitable part of industrialism. So we're stuck with them.
Right.
As long as they serve the public good, then they're fine.
Yes.
So it's not about wrestling them into the ground and be gone with them. It's not
Right.
about being anti-establishment. It's about figuring out how we can coexist without them driving us off the edge of a cliff while making their profits, And it's about good business that doesn't destroy us, but serves the public and keeps our economies boosted and for a long time in a sustainable fashion. That's how
Yeah.
I see it.
Yeah. We all
Um,
want to, have a job and have,
Yeah, they're
to live in
big
and,
jobs. There's a lot of jobs. Most of my friends are in these big companies, you know,
of course.
or a lot. Maybe the farming community less so, but yeah, I think that's an important thing to that. A lot of people think, God, we need to do away with them, and you're like, that's never going to happen. One, and it's maybe the wrong conversation to be having about
Yeah,
it. Um, with regards the legal limits of things, that's a kind of a controversial issue, right? Because
it
they
is.
they do want to keep increasing the limits of everything. Um,
Sometimes, yeah.
Makes sense because then they pay less or they have to be less worried about how much gets released into our waters.
Mhm.
Do you see that happening a lot? Or
I mean, I think it's a conversation about science. Science is a very people think of it as the science has come out and this is it forever. And
yeah,
unfortunately, science is always evolving, right? And there's many different pieces of science that you have to take into account. So, for instance, sometimes an internal science department of a company, like let's say DuPont, that used to run
I
a
know
lot
that
of
name.
throughout the country. There are scientists found in the 40s and 50s that their products were harming people and harming the water outside of their factories. But
Yeah.
they kept that research internal and they didn't share it. And so
Mhm.
it fell to communities later through lawsuits, through community action and work to realize, okay, everyone who's sick that lives near this factory that was dumping their leftover toxic byproducts into
Mm,
the water and then we were drinking that caused a problem, right? And so but then we have the regulatory science, right? So now the EPA would come in and do a bunch of testing and then they find these whether we call it a superfund site, which is something we do in this country, because sometimes what happens is you have a factory
yeah.
and they leave and the community doesn't realize till 40, 50 years later that there were toxins that were left over. And so um, there's just so many different ways to look at these issues in terms
I
of like the internal scientists might find one thing and then the regulatory scientists might find something else. And also, if we want to use a particular group of chemicals, which everybody knows about, or a lot of people do, if you're looking at water, is PFAS, right? And so when I started working
yeah.
with Erin in the book on this book in 2016, we didn't have we had like health recommendations around how much PFAS was allowed in water, and it was at set at
Mhm.
400 parts per trillion, which as you can imagine, when you hear the word trillion, it's a very tiny
Minimal.
of
Yeah.
a chemical that's in a very large body of water, right? Um, and that was what the scientists had found was safe, and then they started to look at, well, let's look at if you have a lifetime exposure. And so suddenly it was, I think it was 2019 or 2020, as they were continuing to research these things, the science kept happening and evolving. They were like, oh no, we need to lower those limits. It needs to be 70 parts
Mm.
per trillion for these certain types of chemicals. And now we just have, in 2024, we actually now have enforceable levels for PFAS regulated through the EPA. And for two of the best known ones, PFOA and PFAS, those levels are 4 parts per trillion.
Four. Where
So,
did they go from? 70?
well, they started at 400,
400.
we're at 70,
Hold
and
on.
now
So
we're
that's a
at 4.
thousand. Is that 1,000% decreased?
I'm not,
And a
I'm not
multiplier, a
good,
divided?
but
Wow.
it's a big jump, right?
That's
And
a
that's
pretty big jump.
yeah, and that's the science working, right? And so
Yeah.
then we come to this conversation of, well, gosh, we should probably be funding more research, having more people that understand these issues to look at them. Because,
Hmm.
the problem is that the way it works in this country and in most countries is that people are allowed to pollute. And then later we kind of come back and say, oh gosh, that was too much, and so
Yeah.
citizens, communities become the guinea pigs that are just drinking these chemicals.
And then it's
And we're not even looking at the idea of like multiple chemicals on a human body, right? We can only study one chemical at a time,
Mm,
and we know there's multiple chemicals that people are potentially ingesting. So it can be
yeah.
very overwhelming when we start to look at it from that perspective.
Yeah, there's so many things there. Um, Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring,
Yes.
right? And Rachel
Yes.
Carson back in the, I think, 70s, she was, what was she? A marine biologist, I think, something like that. But
She was
she
a
definitely,
researcher and writer. She actually worked for the US government, which not a lot of people
oh,
know.
I
She
didn't
was
know
a,
that. And
yeah, yeah. If you look at her website, you learn a lot of interesting things.
okay,
She was a writer as
smash.
well as a researcher, so it was both.
Yeah, smashing woman, anyways. And because of her, they say that the Environmental Protection Agency was created, that it caused such a storm of controversy going, wow, what are these chemicals doing to us? And
Hmm.
one of the take-home messages, or two of the take-home messages I had were everything gets into the groundwater that we release into the wherever. It just doesn't stay stagnant anywhere. It usually goes underwater in these whatever rivers and passages, and then the things all come together.
Yes.
And that's where it's like the mad scientist concoction of chemicals that keep mixing with one another. And that's the stuff that could potentially be entering our bodies, especially when you give the point that we're using 100-year systems to filter out stuff that it's probably just completely overwhelmed in many places. So massive add-on of chemicals mixing together, going through 100-year-old system, and we're trying to be calm about what's coming out in our drinking water. Um,
Yeah.
so, do you think we need water filters, Suzanne?
I mean, I think
Or
it
should
is
we think about having water filters at
wise
some
for
point?
most people to consider some type of water filtration system for your home or a
Yeah,
different source of water, depending on where you live, depending on what industries are nearby. I
right,
want to make one other point to what you were saying about well, again, getting back to the science. So we in the United States, one of the ways that we regulate water is through the Clean Water Act, right? This is one of the things that came out of
right.
establishing the EPA. And we have this thing called within that, these laws are written in a very archaic way. I would certainly rewrite them in a different way, but we call it the waters of the US, right? The Clean Water Act is looking at the waters of the US. And so since that came out, we have been debating for more than 50 years. What are the waters of the US? Is that our riverways? Is that like small little streams and wetlands? And it just continues to flip flop. So when we were under the Obama administration, him and his Congress decided, okay, let's be more strict in how we're going to regulate the waters of the US.
Yeah,
And so that gave more protections to these smaller waterways, right? And again, I'm not a scientist, but I talk to them, I research this stuff, and many water scientists believe that an ecosystem is not just one river, right? There's all these tiny little tributaries
interconnectedness.
and different
Yeah,
waterways that go to it. And so they should all be protected because again, if a contaminant were to get into one small piece of this, that it could impact bigger waterways. And now we're under an administration that's like, no, we don't want to look at these smaller things. This is hard for developers. It's hard for business. There's too many regulations.
too
And
much
so
red tape is the argument
exactly.
there, right? Okay.
But then what happens is then we have less regulation, and then again, we're going to have more communities that get sick, that don't understand how a chemical got into their,
Yeah,
you know, freshwater systems. And I will say that water treatment systems are doing the best that they can in terms of filtration, right? This is their
yeah,
job. We're looking at the different water resources available, and then we're trying to hopefully filtrate in the best way possible so that we are providing as clean water as possible. But part of what I wrote about in the book that I continue to write about in the newsletter is all the ways that it's still not working, right? And that there's still things that get through, there's
yeah,
still communities that get sick. And so that's the issue. And so, yeah, I would say someone who wants to be more cautious should find a filtration system. And again, this comes back to economics, right? Not everybody owns a home or has the
Yeah.
funds to have a $5,000 whole house water filtration system. So
Yeah.
you have to look at what can I do with the resources that I have. So is there, a
Absolutely.
tabletop water filtration system that will get me close to there? Could I put, we like I'm a renter. I don't own my home. And so like whenever I move to a new place, like I have water filters that I put on my shower. Those are pretty affordable, probably in the
Are they the
50
carbon
$70
ones?
range.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. Are they the carbon ones you wind on? Because I got
Correct.
an advert
Yeah,
for one of those on YouTube. I was like, oh,
sure.
that sounds pretty
Yeah.
smart.
And there's also, I want to say there's a lot of companies that also like feed into people's fears. And so I think it's
Yeah.
important to try to do as much research as possible. When it comes to water filtration, you really want to find out as best as you can what potential chemicals are in your water system and try to match your filtration so that you're actually filtering out the right things. So
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
sometimes, and I know this is a topic you want to get into, but people love to talk with me about fluoride. Um, People are very concerned about fluoride and
I'm just
filtration.
concerned about my teeth, Suzanne, okay?
But in the grand scheme of water pollution and water chemicals, fluoride is not the most um, aggressive in terms of what it might do to your health. There's not to say that there aren't some concerns, and we can talk about those. But in general, I think a lot of people are sort of looking over here like, oh my gosh, I have to get a water filtration system for the fluoride.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you need a water filtration system for PFAS because those chemicals
Watch, yeah, watch
everywhere and
Dark
we're not
Waters or something. Yeah.
and that those have much bigger damage to the body, right? And this is now we're into cancer, we're into liver issues,
Infertility. Yeah.
hormonal problems, fertility,
Hmm.
exactly. And so again, I know a lot of people are very passionate about fluoride, and we can talk about it, but it's just
Yeah.
not the biggest issue
I
out there.
remember I remember you saying that in an interview before, and the penny did drop, or I was like, okay, yeah, no, of course it's the obvious one,
Yeah.
that everyone talks about. It's the other stuff. It's the forever chemicals and
Or
all
lead, which is still an
lead.
issue in the
Yeah,
country and a
yeah.
lot of other
And
countries.
and is lead the one that builds up in your body constantly?
Lead is a
Like
known
like
neurotoxin and is
yeah.
very detrimental to developing brains. So it's particularly problematic for children. And
So that's
a
what
lot
happened to
of
me
schools that have old, like the drinking water throughout the school
through the
is from
pipes.
the
Yeah.
70s, and there's lead pipes, and the children are drinking, and it's bad.
That's what I'm just thinking the flushing. You did something about flushing, didn't you? In one of the
So
schools or it's a
so this is
method.
another thing. So we have regulations that talk about, so we have a lead and copper rule in this country. And so
Mhm.
one thing that some places will do is that in order to pass their test is that they'll flush the system. So they'll run the water for 5, 10 minutes before they do the test so that the test comes back in a positive way, meaning, oh, there's not too
Yeah.
much.
Nothing
Um,
to worry about here. Yeah.
Correct. But one thing we can learn from that is that if you potentially live in a place where you suspect that you might have lead pipes that are leaking, you also could flush your water, meaning you could run the water for 5 minutes before you drink it. Now, of course,
Mhm.
even better than that would be to have a filtration system that will get the lead out. But
Yeah.
yes, so it's these things. It does work to sort of flush out the pipes if you want to try to avoid getting
Good.
that fine from the EPA.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting.
Mhm.
God, I'm stumped with that one. Um, yeah. The way I told you I had printing problems, and then
Yes.
the Wi-Fi clicking in it printed the one without the comments on it because I had
Oh,
so many. I was just thinking, damn it. With the chemical production, I think it was I'll go off my memory. The European Environmental Bureau said there's 1.41 chemical a new chemical being produced every 1.4 seconds.
wow.
Like that's a whammy of an amount.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, like, we talked about the Superfund sites.
Hmm.
Um, I'm sure we have stuff like that over here. We just don't have the name Superfund on it.
Sure.
Are they been managed properly, or are they being cleaned up properly, or
They are being
who's
managed.
paying for it?
Right. They're being managed at a snail's pace. I think there's about 30,000 sites on
Yeah.
our what's called the national priority list. So that's like the worst of the worst.
Okay. Okay.
And actually, during our last Trump administration, I just remember this so clearly. There was a press release like, "Yay, we've cleaned up 10 sites." And I was like, "Great, 10 sites down, like
Hmm.
29,990 to go."
Yeah. Hey, but you know how do you eat an elephant? One bit at a time.
Yeah.
Like, no,
So
yeah,
again,
but yeah.
don't want
Hmm.
to knock progress. At the same time, it's a huge problem. It's
Yeah.
not happening very quickly. A lot of that is a resource issue. So when the Superfund site was like this whole program was established through the EPA, originally there was taxes that made polluters pay. And those
Yeah.
taxes ran out because again, a lot of things that happen, again, I'm just speaking to the US because that's what I know best.
No, that's
Um,
fine. It's a blueprint that we can all pay attention to.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
so our Congress has to sort of re-up these things every few years. And so at some point in the 90s, it just went lax.
Hmm.
Nobody noticed. This is the problem. We have these policies, but when we're not all paying attention and, there's different things that capture our national attention.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden that program now just came to taxpayers, really. I mean, this is people forget that, we pay taxes. That's a lot of what funds the US government. So
Yeah.
now we have private corporations who have polluted. We pay for the EPA to regulate them. And then we're also now paying for the cleanup, right? And so
Right.
there's very much a movement for more places to understand and for certain companies to now come back and have to cough up the money to pay for these things. But it's a very long, rigorous process. It's going very, very slowly. We discover new Superfund sites all the time. I received an email not too long ago from someone who is a regular reader of the report, and they were like, "So, how do communities like? Does the EPA send an email? Like, how do people find out about Superfund sites?" And I was like, "Oh no,
No, no.
communities get sick." And then they
Wow.
call everyone. They call their local politicians. They call the EPA.
Yeah.
They call the health
They sound
department.
the alarm. Yeah.
And then at some point, we realize, oh gosh, okay, now we have people that understand these issues come out, survey,
Mhm.
and then they find, oh gosh, here was an electronics company from 1970 something, that
A
closed and didn't,
brownfield site.
yeah, they didn't close it up properly. And, there's been
Yeah.
stuff leaking into the local water supply for 20 years.
Yikes.
Yeah.
And so
But
that's
we do
the
have a map of Superfund sites, so people can look that up. That's through the EPA.
right.
Um, Again, these are things that you have to be aware that these are issues that happen. Like I like to talk to people when you think about where you want to live. If you're moving, if you're
I
going to
was
buy
just
a
thinking that.
home, like
Yeah.
check out our near Superfund site and where are they at in the process? Are
Or just
they?
follow where Erin and Suzanne moved to because they seem to be
Well,
in the know.
no, we both live in places. It's unfortunately very hard to find a place that's not touched by these issues.
Yeah.
Sadly,
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. Wow.
yeah.
And so basically the taxpayer is paying for these cleanups. And I remember during the Biden administration, there was an update that there was 725 million allocated for cleanups of these sites. Um, or was
Which
it mine shafts and places where companies had gone bankrupt? And all I was thinking was, that's great, but what's stopping it happening again? Because these are these like once in a generation investments that
Mhm.
will put into the put into circulation the money to clean up, and then people get cleaner water. But on the other side, if the whatever the chemicals tap is just massively turned on, where we're just going to end up with that once in a generation cleanup, which costs mega money, that's landing on the taxpayer basically. If that
Mhm.
polluter pays model isn't there, um, what's going to stop that happening again and again and again?
Correct. And last week I
Mm,
wrote a story for our newsletter about Hoosick Falls, New York. So this is a town that there was a plastics plant
mm,
that had polluted the town. One concerned citizen, Michael Hickley, had his dad died of cancer prematurely, he felt, and he just did a quick Google search. What was the plant? His dad worked at the plant. And he made this connection that there had been, I think it's PFAS or no, I may have been PFOA. I think it was PFOA and TCE, which are two very detrimental chemicals.
mhm.
And um, paid out of his own pocket to test the water. And remember, we talked about, at that time it was maybe 400 parts per trillion is what was the recommended amount. The tests came back at 21,000 parts per trillion.
Ah,
And I wrote about the town because last month they got a new
yeah,
water source, but this is after more than 10 years of the community fighting, people going storming their state capitol with their PFAS numbers on them, and
yeah,
lots of community action. And now they have a new clean water source that's being connected to the water treatment system, which is what should happen. But I think
yeah,
it's a celebration at the same time. It's so hard because there's so many communities that don't have this.
yeah.
They had to find this pollution again because it was a small town, so it wasn't a place that was under any kind of EPA regulation. I think I lost you again.
Suzanne, sorry, my internet cut
Okay, I saw
off
you. I
again there.
lost you again.
Oh,
It's okay.
apologies. I don't know what that is. Um, sorry, you were saying you got, oh, apologies. Um,
Okay, I'm not sure where I got cut off, but the point is that it was a small town.
yeah,
They weren't being monitored by the EPA because they fall under the amount of people that use that water treatment system. But they took it into their own hands
yeah,
because they saw people getting sick. They did the water tests. Once the state and local realized what was happening, well, first they denied it, which is something that also happens quite commonly.
yeah,
But once we got over that hump and they realized there was a real problem here, then they started to get into action. But it just takes so much time, and it's
yeah.
again, while people are waiting for a new clean water system, what are you supposed to drink? We've already discussed you need to drink water every day.
Absolutely. And I my heart goes out to those poor souls. And I mean, it's great that they did get some kind of new system going. My friends bought a new house close to Dublin, and it's that we have a housing crisis over here, which is
Oh, we
massive.
have it.
And
That's a worldwide problem.
Yeah, I agree. But this one, I have a background in property and investment, and looked at European markets, and Ireland is like top of the rank of craziness. Like
Mhm.
it's shaping everything. And one of the big issues now is like we need to build as much as we can to house the people, large homeless crisis, all this stuff. And then the the planning permission from developers is often shut down because they don't have enough infrastructure in place for these big estates that they're trying to build. Then there's public outrage going, why the hell would you shut this down? Because like we need the housing. So everyone's behind that, or many people. What they
Sure.
don't realize is that often they shut it down, or they go, come back to us when you set up the infrastructure with adequate water supply, with adequate all the other services. And um, my friend lives in an area now that has had such massive expansion that it's not managing to use enough water. There's not enough water supply to supply the all the new estates together. So you see in the town, the one side on the right side, constant water supply, and on the left side, they're they regularly run out of water. Um, when they have the dishwasher on, often if they open it up, the smell goes through the whole house of chlorine, which
Yeah.
leads me to the idea of, okay, there's not enough water, so you use higher levels of chlorine for any contamination that's in it, and then it's a high level of chlorine in the water, right? And then they get these boil notices,
Mhm.
and they get regular handouts of water, and these are like brand new estates, lovely houses, and you're like, oh my God, that's what they're trying to like stop. You know,
Yeah.
that's what they're. So when there's public outrage about these developments, it's like, no, it's not. You're not getting enough water there. So we have to be responsible about getting the services there before we let bunch of unknown people who are doing a massive investment, once in a lifetime sized investment of a house, and then they have water issues that you just hope to God that they get rectified because
Exactly.
like
And
you,
you're buying a new home, you're not thinking, oh gosh, is the water gonna be
yeah.
plentiful?
Yeah, yeah, it's like
Is it
where's
contaminated?
it
Is it gonna
how close
smell
is
like
it? How
pool?
close is it to a school? Is it in a nice area? Is there
Right.
enough woodland all around, all that stuff? But you do not think about
Yeah.
water supplies. But you shouldn't need to. It shouldn't
Yeah.
be it should be a given that if you're buying a place that that stuff that's not something you should be thinking about. So yeah, it's definitely something people need to maybe watch out for now. Probably in a lot of places around the world to just do a bit of research and take it into your own hands to see a lot of all this water stuff is taking it into your own hands, isn't it? Like to
Yeah. I mean,
do
this
that little
is,
bit of extra research and don't always believe the politicians and the state agencies, because they don't want trouble. You know, I don't think, even if there is an issue, they're like, oh God, not on my term.
Mhm.
Shove it
Mhm.
back. It's going to be a massive cost. We don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's,
Here in Richmond, we're a city of 200,000 plus people. And when we had our water issue, the new mayor had been in office for about 4 or 5 days. And all of
oh,
a sudden he's got a massive water crisis, right?
yeah,
And, I have a lot of empathy for our
the
elected
poor
officials
guy.
because a lot of them don't
Yeah,
know. There's so many different issues that are out there right now poverty and homelessness and environmental
yeah,
issues and the
yeah,
changing climate and the need for farmland and right like there's just so much going on and water is just one of those issues. At
yeah,
the same time it's one that can be quite devastating because if you don't have water at the tap or you have a huge contamination crisis, that is very impactful not just to people's lives and livelihoods but businesses, schools, hospitals.
yes, yeah.
A
And
lot.
farms
Yeah,
as
of
well,
course. Yeah,
you
the
know?
farmland and yeah, and our
Yeah,
food supply, all of that. It all plays together.
yeah. And just on the farms thing, I think there's a, just say you're, if agriculture is often demonized that it takes a lot of water and resources. Um, but when I looked kind of deeply into a lot of these things and a lot of the chemicals that were being used in different parts of the world, what the penny dropped that the less chemical intensive agriculture is, yes, it does use a lot of resources of water, but it doesn't really destroy the water. It gets put back in the system and brought in. Then there's the intensive side, say, where it's like high amounts of chemicals. I'm not saying the traditional agriculture, pasture based, can have chemicals. We're trying to move away from them in a
Sure.
reasonable way, but it's the intensive side that really often does destroy the water. And on top of that, you have the companies, the industrial companies that are doing massive damage to the water that basically renders it useless to forevermore. So even though the agriculture might use more on paper, it's been able to be circulated back into the system more. Um, and you read statistics about China and all these reports coming out that there's water there that they can never use again. There's 5% water that's able to be that's drinkable in a few of the cities, and you're going, wow, okay, so it's been destroyed. It's landing in the waterways where it's all come together, and God forbid you fall into one of those rivers. Like
Yeah.
it's so yeah, it's complicated stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's, like I said, most of what I focus on is water quality, but there is water scarcity. There's also water privatization, which we haven't really talked about, but that's
Oh,
another, these big
yeah,
companies come into places and gobble up all the water resources.
yeah.
There's also a thing happening right now that with AI that people don't realize that these big, in order to
Data
run,
centers.
yeah, the data centers, that
Yeah,
using a lot of water, and that's something I haven't quite touched yet in my research, but I get more and more requests to talk about that. And so it's
yeah.
important to
It's
to
big
dive
here.
in. But right, there's so many different pieces of water.
Yeah. And the data centers are a massive debate in Ireland at the moment.
Hmm.
Well, and they will be for a long time because of
Right.
AI and everything. We're in a temperate climate, so we're perfectly suited for these data centers, for the
Yeah.
cooling and everything. They need that climate.
Yeah.
Um, but obviously, going back to the idea that do want the jobs, the corporate jobs, the money, the foreign direct investment they bring into a country is great.
Mhm.
It affords us things like newer roads and services. At the same time, it comes at a price. Yeah, that if these data centers are only getting started. I have a friend that works on them in the UK, and they're
Yeah.
European wide, and they're looking for big build-ups,
I
massive,
bet.
like, and so you'd be thinking, well, how is that going to pan out for us, say in Ireland, if there's a lot of data centers that use, as you just mentioned there, a lot of water and a lot of electricity. Um, where this is where it gets tricky with the debate on energy, because you're like, well, we're trying to go renewable and all of this stuff, but if we're getting this massive energy usage boost or demand from AI, and if they say it's only going to be 10% extra the worldwide energy supplies that we're already struggling with, um, and you're kind of going, well, are we building more energy just to be used for these data centers? And just like an avocado farm that
Sure.
soaks up all the water of the local areas, leaves all the small farmers and communities without water because they have influence over how the system runs. I could well imagine down the road that um, the cloud, all our photos, all the videos, all the AI takes uh, is the one that will win out over the local, smaller, weaker, smaller voiced populations compared to big corporations who have bigger voices and strategically can align themselves and have very strong influence. And you're kind of going, okay, this is something we probably do need to pay attention to in the long run.
Very much.
Right now,
Yeah. And I'm a writer, so it doesn't occur to me that I would need a tool like AI to write an email, let's say, because it's just comes
yeah,
very naturally to me. But I understand there's a lot of people in the professional world that struggle and want to look a certain part, or if you're a content creator and if you're doing stuff every day, you use these tools, right? These
yeah,
content development tools. It's very much pushing us forward into a new level of business, a new level of professionalism.
yeah.
And so, for someone like me, it's sort of easy to laugh off, like, why would you use AI? That's not something, but it's very much the future. And Right. And then again, it's one of those things that, we don't think about water because all those pipes are below us, right? And we don't think about, if you get into a chat GPT, it just seems like a different part of a browser and it's on your computer, but there's
Yeah,
this whole background infrastructure that allows these things to occur. And how is it straining resources? Are we doing it in the smartest way? Can we
yeah,
think
yeah,
about environmental stuff as we're building out these big networks, right?
yeah,
Another big issue in this country is, ion lithium batteries to do
yes.
all of our electric cars. And like we have all this, it's so funny because right here we are like wanting to be more eco-friendly and get rid of lessen our
Hmm.
fossil fuel impacts. And now we have these huge battery factories and there's issues there.
Oh, are you producing on site? On site? On site? Are you producing domestically that stuff?
California and Texas are the largest
Oh, lithium ion. Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
producer isn't the right word, but right, they're putting in these factories very quickly
Right.
because there's such a huge demand and the cost has gone down significantly, right? That we want,
Oh,
and it's funny because here we are like environmentalists, we want the, electric cars and we
yeah,
want
yeah.
more things happening through battery. And then at the same time, are we building them in the smartest way? What happens when there's a fire? Like there's a big case, Moss Landing in California that we wrote about because the community there is suing. There was a huge fire that broke out and it impacted the resources, the water. And, these are things that we have to think about. And now, people in other states are seeing what happened there. And,
Yeah.
city councils or states are looking at these proposals. And again, you have a business that's saying, oh, we're going to employ this many people and it's going to be so great for the economy. But when it crashes your natural resources and impacts
Yeah.
negatively people's communities and people's livelihoods, it's a again, it's a nuanced
Not
debate.
as sustainable as one might hope.
Yeah. Yep.
I like that you're thinking that because I do think we need to always think critically about these solutions that are being proposed to us. Um, I have a friend who's a geologist who worked all over the world on mines.
Mm,
Probably the controversial and the not so controversial, but now he's back into the working domestically. And he talked about there's like the core cobalt, lithium ion, nickel, all these things. He said there's not enough commercial deposits by his estimates of nickel in the world
yeah.
at all. He said he'll take the commercial wave, right? So he'll take the money from the jobs, because it's good jobs to work on, but he doesn't believe that the resources are there enough for us to do the massive transition that. And he has solar panels and all that. He's like, see, it's this thing of we do need to stay critical about it. And like the argument with the fossil fuels is they might run out sometime and it leads to conflict and all this stuff. Um, if those things run out, it's the same stuff again. So I don't know if we need to keep asking questions or keep staying skeptical about corporate solutions for things, and maybe the public trying to steer it a little bit more, because a lot of those things aren't as environmentally friendly and sustainable as we would hope them to be, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
rant over.
Yeah, I mean, I think about this a lot because I have a hybrid car, so it's part electric and part
Yeah,
gas, and you know, I, it's hard to know what technology was available when, and and so much of it comes from demand. But I just think about, gosh, if we had hybrid cars in the 60s or 70s, we could at least have lessened the impact and been able to use these fossil fuel resources for longer and lessened the
yeah,
impact, right? And
yeah, yeah.
so, but again, I
Smartly.
think some of
Yeah.
that comes back to consumer demand and consumer education. And so that's why, I try to stay curious and I really
Hmm.
feel devoted to writing and talking about these issues so that people can at least learn facts,
Yeah.
take it into account and then make decisions for themselves about what is the right level of resources that they can devote to these things. I get it. People are busy working their job, feeding their families.
Yeah.
Everybody's very much trying to survive. Not everybody is an eco activist or advocate. At the same
Yeah.
time, and I know you're working on your book, but I mean, these are things that do impact people personally. And so here you are just trying to get through life, and then suddenly there's a water crisis, or there's, something
Yeah.
comes up. You buy a new home and the water smells horrible.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's like, then you start to realize, oh, I am a citizen living on this planet, and these
Yeah.
resources, there's only a certain amount to go around.
Yeah.
When there's pollution issues, they may not impact you in this moment, but they might impact you later. They might impact your
Hmm.
friends, your family in other places. So I think it's important for people to, like I said, be curious, get educated, and get, as involved as they can. It's
Yeah,
different for
absolutely.
everyone.
Well, we have all these alarm bells ringing. Some of them might be fake and overboard, but a lot of them are definitely very serious. And we do need to pay attention to them. And I do see the environment as like the essential infrastructure we live on. We
Yeah.
needed our air, our water, the land we have, the stuff we use. Like if we don't take care of it and live in harmony with all this stuff, then we will become unhealthy, conflicts rise, like all the
Yeah.
things that go along with it. So I think we are at a critical point where we do need to look at these things. And the awkward thing is, though, we're jaded. Most people are kind of jaded. There's a lot of crazy stuff happening in the world right now. So
Yeah.
it's important to, I don't know, stay sane, stay calm about it, and kind of stay curious, as you said. I think that's the main thing. And there are talking about the chemicals thing and maybe fear around what's in our water. One of the important things I learned was that if you stay healthy, like your metabolic health is a huge part in dealing with these chemicals as well. Like our bodies are designed to be able to detoxify a certain amount, so that if you manage to stay healthy in many ways, you can offset the huge amount of chemicals that is coming at us from all sides. But it's just kind of one of those things that I'd like to mention, that if people get very, very scared, like don't worry that much. We can detoxify, and then there are reasonable steps you can take to protect yourself, and move forward and live a good life. It's not like there's people smoking every day for 70 years and they live that, and smoking kills. Yeah. So,
Sure.
so it's, just to not go overboard on the fear thing. Not that you were. I'm just saying it's a
Yeah,
daunting world right now, but
it is. It
to
is.
stay positive that we can figure out a lot of these issues,
Yeah.
and we
And I
are.
think people forget how much power we have. And I think consumer demand, the market does respond to that. And so if more
Yeah,
people have concerns about water, have concerns about toxic pollutants in their air, in their land, the more that we are educated and that we make demands of these corporations, of companies, of our elected officials, to take these issues seriously, the more that it can happen, and so
yeah,
that's why Erin taught me this, but go to your community meetings, whether that's a town hall meeting or if there's you know it's named different things in different places, but if you have a lot of especially locally, a lot of these committees, it's one or two people. So maybe if you have a few hours that you volunteer to be part of a committee that
hmm,
looks into these issues, or you volunteer to help someone who's running, and cares about water issues to
yeah,
suddenly help them, or maybe you just babysit your friend's kids so they can go to the meeting and then report
yeah,
back, right? Like there's so
yeah,
many different ways to get involved. I think if there's one message I can leave with everyone or impart on everyone is just like just do something, right? Like it doesn't matter. Maybe you like to make art and you want to make a documentary about this stuff, or you want to put signs in your yard, right? Like there's so many different
Mhm.
ways that you can get involved. You don't have to be an environmental scientist, and you don't have to be the CEO of a big company
Right.
to make change happen. And I think that's what I find really interesting about a lot of these stories. Like I said, this person in Hoosick Falls who just does a 5 minute Google search, pays a little out of pocket for the water testing, and then like this whole thing
Whole thing
happens.
unfolds. Yeah. Yeah.
Or someone decides to write a book, or to write something for your local newspaper, right? Like there's so many
Mhm.
different ways that you can use your talents, your resources, and at the level that you're able to. I get it. Not everybody can spend all weekend working on these things, but
Yeah.
in the communities that I've studied and written about, I mean, it's a lot of times less than 5 people that are working on these issues that actually get something accomplished. So I always think,
Yeah.
gosh, if there was 10, if there was 20, if there was 30 people who are just a little bit invested. I remember I was very into minimalist blogs for a while, and people talk about
Okay.
zero waste or these kinds of things. And they're like, what we need is more people trying to imperfectly do this than everyone trying to be perfect. And like, and I think that's such a great message for environmental issues in general.
Yeah.
What can I do a little bit? What can and maybe it's only 1 hour a month, right? 1 hour a year, whatever it is.
Hmm.
How are you gonna, give something back? Because we all are so lucky to live on this planet and to have all the resources that we do. And there is so much
Hmm.
creativity and innovation happening. And it's, to me, yeah, if you work for a corporation, maybe you can create a little interest group that looks at these issues a little more broadly, or you have legal skills and you can lend that to people. So I
Yeah.
think there's so many different ways to get involved, and you don't have to, it doesn't have to look like activist at the rally
Yeah.
if that's not for
Absolutely.
you. I know
Yeah.
a lot of people
Mm.
are like to read books or stay home, so get in chat rooms, or just, read our newsletter, whatever is the right
Mm.
level for your involvement. But there's so much to do, and there's,
There's absolutely across the board.
yeah,
I often think it's going to sound counterintuitive, but it's not just the environment that needs saving. Like there's so much across the board that the world needs our help
yeah,
with, you know,
yeah,
socially, there's care work, everything. There's a load of stuff.
yeah,
And I think realizing we have agency is huge. Realizing
mm,
that we can play a part is massive. And if you're dealing with any kind of anxiety from all the doom and gloom in the newspapers, taking those small actions and getting into groups apparently it reduces anxiety. And I think that is a great way to yeah to do something instead of worrying yourself into a little corner because
yeah,
I mean, let's be honest, most people do get affected by these headlines. It's not like they're all just bouncing off us and we've force fields and we don't feel the impact or the weight of this stuff. Um, so yeah, becoming active is great. And to flog your book again, there's like the community action side of things. That's like it's like tried and tested. You know
yeah,
what's
yeah,
there. It's just when you read that you go, oh, this is what I need. And not only for water issues, for any issues. There's an issue I have that I'm talking to someone about farming, and there's a legal dispute, and they're being unjustly attacked. And I'd be thinking I'd recommend them your book because it's the same community organization that empowers the communities to
yeah,
push back on what may otherwise be just a tyrant of a villain that seems unstoppable. But when you get together and you follow an A to Z list of what you've described, going down into the nitty gritty of setting up a Facebook group,
Yeah,
like all of these things, step by
exactly.
step, that's
Yeah.
massively valuable. And it's not just plucked out of thin air.
Yeah. I want to make too a point about comment sections online because I know that a lot of us look at social media and it feels like such a cesspool because so many people like to go on and complain. And I just want to remind everyone that, we can also use comment sections for good and we can post links to research, we can post
Mhm.
celebrations. I think it's just something I see in myself and in my community, and I want us all to work to change it because again, the Superman's coming thing works in any capacity, but right, like the online communities are made of people, and we are those
Yeah.
people, and so we can change. And I'm not saying that everything has to be positive. It's not a Pollyanna situation, but I think we could have much better conversations with evidence-based research, with
Mhm.
people talking about what's worked for them, people talking about what it's like to go to a town hall meeting, people helping with resources of how to get connected to your elected officials, right? Like there's so much that all of us could just, with 5 more minutes of thought and carefulness, create better online communities as well.
Love it. Love it. And to add to that, don't be arguing with bots. Just stop it. Just be
Yes.
aware that there's bots in pretty much everywhere that there's something good trying to be done. There's the counter move from whatever forces. And just if you're arguing and taking up a lot of your energy, being angry at these profiles and thinking this is horrendous stuff that these people are saying, click in, see how many followers they have, and if it looks suspicious, you can
It's,
you can rest assured that it's not real. You're not. It's not a person. It's designed to annoy you and distract you, sow seeds of doubt,
yeah,
and deflect off the real issues. And I think the devil is there in disarming us and knocking us down and thinking that we can't make any changes.
correct.
That's all by design. So
Yeah.
just ignore it and maybe call it out. Yeah,
Yeah, and change happens slowly, unfortunately. I wish for so many communities that are dealing with pollution that, they could wake up the next morning and things get better. But a lot of times it's a dance. It's 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, some version of that. And
yeah,
Erin has been so inspirational to me of like, you just keep going, you keep that tenacity,
yeah.
don't stop because that's what really makes the difference, and it's funny, but that's such great advice with anything, whether that's your career, your family, hobbies that you want to get better at, right? Like you don't start at the top, you start as a beginner and you keep going and you learn your lessons and you get better. And that is true for environmental action as much as dance lessons
Mhm.
or learning how to buy a home, whatever is your thing that you're working on.
Brilliant. Brilliant. My internet's after like being wobbly again, but I caught the tail end of that. Suzanne, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And again, I can't sing my praises enough for the two of you and the work you do. And the book is massive. It's one of the most important books of our time, and I mean that. Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
thanks,
Appreciate that.
and hopefully we can talk again sometime.
Sounds good.
You can
Thanks so
keep me
much for having
updated
me.
about everything that's happening.
Always.
All right. Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning into this conversation. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please hit the follow button, and so you'll see more of my content in the future. It would really mean a lot to me because I'm just starting out. Thanks, and see you soon.